Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
In the military, veterans answer the call to serve. Now it's our turn. At Hire Heroes USA, they're changing lives, helping veterans and military spouses secure meaningful careers, all at no cost.
With over 100,000 success stories and counting nationwide, they're connecting skilled veterans with employers who recognize their true value. Visit hireheroesusa.org to access their services or to support their mission. What does an 18-year veteran of the tech industry and a 20-year veteran of the military have in common? More than you might think. Welcome, everyone, to the Second Act podcast, leveling up your life's journey.
You can't stop me! You don't got the power, hey, shut me down. That's not an option. I'm my biggest problem. You don't got the power, hey, shut me down. That's not an option. You can't stop me!
Welcome back to the Second Act podcast with Michael and John. We're thrilled to have another speaker on our show, John.
Hey, Michael.
Super exciting stuff today.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
It's going to be interesting because Tucker is a little unique in how he's approaching his second act. So we'll get into that. But as our episodes keep rolling, we're continuing to get positive feedback on the format, on the direction of the Second Act podcast. Our subscribers are continuing to grow. All the things that fuel our motivation and efforts to make this a great experience for our audience and our guests. And speaking of guests...
Man, I'm excited. Like you said, this is going to be a fun episode. In this one, we're excited to be joined by Tucker Kimbrough. He was born and raised in Atlanta, but moved to Montana to pursue skiing full-time, and eventually found himself in Southern California, where he was actively serving in the Marine Corps. Just got back from a deployment to the Philippines, but he's an officer responsible for communication, strategy, and operations, which for those of you that don't know, is kind of similar functions to public relations in the private sector. Tucker's story's a little unconventional when we compare him to our other guests because he started his adult life with his second act. So he used his youth, education, and skills to follow his passion for skiing, and then found himself amongst some locals who were doing well, at least relatively, in real estate because he decided to create a real estate company called Patriot Property Investment Group, which in my mind is a smart move as a side hustle under any circumstance, but something that can easily become a full-time career when he retires from the military. Outside of work, Tucker continues to ski as many days as possible. He enjoys serving his community through his church and pursuing a passion project called Botero Coffee Club, a veteran-owned small business committed to sustainable artisan coffee beans from Colombian farmers and producers who have not had a chance to break into the U.S. market. Very cool stuff, man. Welcome, Tucker.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate you guys having me on. It's an absolute pleasure.
Tell me, before we get too far into this, you just got back from deployment. 2 months, right, in the Philippines?
Yes, sir, about 2 months.
And did you have a good time?
It was a great time. That was what I joined the Marine Corps to do. I wanted to go expand my horizons, challenge myself, lead a team. Couldn't have been more fortunate in the way everything came together. And we had a great time. We worked with some great partner nations, and I'm excited for the next opportunity to do something like that again. It was really kind of a holistic, like, Marine Corps experience.
Now, for our non-military audience members, is a deployment typically 2 months, or can it vary? How long are our deployments usually?
So there was a time, I think John could speak to this a little better than me, where it was 9 months on, 9 months off, maybe 9 months on, and then 9 months again, and then maybe another 9 months with like some small gaps in between when we were really focused in Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. Now, those types of opportunities are a little fewer and far between. The stuff that we're doing is more exercise, training based, so it's not quite as long typically. There are still some units that will go out for longer periods. You know, you're 8, 9, sometimes 6 months, really depends. Mine was a little shorter. We hoped it could have been longer, but things changed. No big deal. Yep. You work with what you get. You do the best that you can. That's really all you can ask for. But it's varying. And so deployment is just kind of the blanket term. It's the easiest way to just kind of describe it to somebody who's not in the realm of active duty and military. So,
okay.
All right, Tucker. So Georgia to Montana to California. Tell us about that journey and some of the important childhood memories or early adult memories that shaped your thinking and kind of influenced your decisions at your younger age.
Absolutely. So born and raised in Midtown Atlanta, had a wonderful time. I mean, the biggest public park in the state of Georgia was across the street, Piedmont Park, for those that don't know.
Yep.
And so, riding my bike around town, got a real good feel of the city and how everything worked. And it was just, blissful ignorance as I was growing up. I mean, I knew I wanted to be a Marine, and I left it at that. I really didn't dream a lot about what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be in the military. And at one point I was like, I wanted to do special forces. At one point I wanted to start my career as a naval aviator. So that's where I really pursued towards the end of high school and through college. I went to naval aviation school after graduating from Auburn, but there were a few stops along the way. So what really got things started was went to Auburn University as my dream school, studied engineering, got my pilot's license there. But this fateful year, 2020, right? So I graduated in May and had commissioned and fulfilled all the requirements to commission as an officer in the Marine Corps, went to officer candidate school, all that. And then I didn't hear anything for a couple of months. And it was, I started calling, asking questions, obviously understanding that COVID was a thing and that it was going to affect my journey. What I didn't know, it landed me with about 12 months, just under 12 months exactly of unpaid, basically, time off, which, for somebody as ready to go as I was after the fall or the spring semester of 2020, it was a bit heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That was what did it. That was the moment that I realized that I needed to figure my own stuff out and couldn't rely on an entity, even one as great as the Marine Corps. I mean, I wouldn't trade my experiences in the Marine Corps absolutely anything. And I love doing it every day. But I realized for financial stability, something like this could happen again. I could get, some other unknown circumstance, and I wanted to have assets, teams, et cetera, in place to never have that kind of what do I do now experience again. So,
wow, you're a year without pay, and you're out of college. You're supposed to be starting the next phase of your life, and you just said you wanted to be kind of surrounded by teams and things that are propelling you forward. But what on a day-to-day, what are you thinking? Are you kind of trying to think long-term? Or are you just thinking immediate sustainment? What's driving you?
Fortunately, I mean, I have a great family, very supportive family. So the first step, I graduated from college. I just went home. I was home for a couple of weeks until I realized, okay, I need to get out of my hometown, expand my horizons a little bit, and sort of figure out how the world works. Because it was clear to me at that point, I didn't have a full understanding of it. I was like, I'll apply for a engineering job, right? That's my degree. Then I realized, well, nobody wants to hire an engineer for 9 or 10 months before they go off into the military. Like, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so I was just working the problem. I was never really upset. I was just more like, okay, this is the next thing to do. Like, I need to solve the problem. My mom actually had the recommendation she was like, well, you love skiing. You've always wanted to be a ski instructor. Like, you should pursue that. And I was like, Mom, you're a genius. So I went off to Montana just on a road trip with a friend and applied in person, heard back a couple months later, and then found some housing right there, which was a little more challenging, but we figured it out. And then I was skiing every day, and it was the time of my life. I mean, woke up every morning, whether I was working or not, I was either skiing or snowboarding, taught myself how to do both, and then I would teach lessons on both. And then the days that I had off, I would, just kind of ski on my own. But the whole time I was like basically breaking even on existence. So like making just enough money to eat, sleep, and recycle. So I was, looking at Bigger Pockets podcasts, all that sort of thing. I ended up reaching out to my now very good friend, Corey Meyer, on Bigger Pockets, because he was the only other person with a Bigger Pockets account with the location of Big Sky, Montana. And I was just like, hey man, like I'm 22, I'm a Marine officer, I'm going to be, right? I was commissioned at the time, which is, crazy to me, but I was like, I don't have a lot of money, but I work really hard and there's a lot of things that I am good at. And I'd love to just sit down and pick your brain about real estate investing, how you got into it. And
nice.
We went from there. We met up in person a couple of times. There's a lot of things that we just love to talk about, like to hang out. Did a little bit of backcountry skiing. And he was just like the perfect introductory mentor. Like he was really into hands-on, on-the-ground stuff. So he was able to explain the basics and fundamentals of underwriting to me. And his whole thing is asset management. Like that's what he adds to our team now. So was able to really get into the weeds with that to me. And so I basically took all the lessons learned from him and we started working together, got a property up there in Montana after those kind of, we'll call them fireside chats that we had for about 6 months. We got a property up in northern Montana, turned one Airbnb into 2.
Nice.
Through a line of credit they were able to get from the first one. Been running that for the last 2.5 years. It's not the most profitable from a cash flow perspective, but the appreciation has been very nice. It essentially breaks even on cash flow every year, but the appreciation has been about 1.5x. So still
Congrats.
A good, solid first investment. Not, run by any means, but it was a base hit. We figured out how to work together. We figured out a lot of things about financing, and we're able to apply that to what we do now at Patriot Property Investment Group. So Corey was really the one that taught me and took me under his wing and helped me understand how this whole real estate thing really works.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in all the stuff you just shared. But I mean, rewinding a little bit, actually, where did the love and desire for joining the Marine Corps at a young age come from? How did that sort of incubate inside of you? And then how did that manifest into actually joining the Marine Corps?
So that one, I don't have any family that's in the military at all.
Okay.
And my mom, for the longest time, was at a loss for why I would even suggest that. Not that she's not supportive, but
sure.
She didn't understand. It's literally the only thing I ever wanted to do. I mean, I never expressed any interest in not joining the military, like from day one. I mean, before I went to school, I looked at applying for the service academies, decided not to, just kind of, wanted to go to a big SEC school. That was always my dream. And I didn't apply for any jobs other than military jobs while I was in school. I didn't do ROTC. I just decided to go the OCS route. And the Marine Corps was the clear choice based on the connections that I had made, recommendations, and then the organization that I wanted to be a part of, just kind of a warrior culture, a cutthroat kind of culture where you gotta bring it every day.
Nice.
And I'll tell you, I definitely made the right choice as far as branch. Got my butt kicked every day for the first year and a half I was in. I mean, I learned something new every day. I'm humbled every day. Even small administrative things. It's like, oh, sir, you didn't know how to do that? Like, what? So definitely, literally just the only thing I ever aspired to be.
I love that you knew that, so early on in your life, and you stayed focused, on joining the military, specifically the Marine Corps. And it sounds like there were family influences and maybe others that helped sort of ignite that work ethic that you've brought into the military and into the Marine Corps, and you're seeing that among your colleagues. Tell us how that applies to not just what you're doing as active duty, but also in your second act that you've started so early days in your life.
So the big thing to touch on there is focus. So the first thing that I focus on every day is the Marine Corps. Like, what are my responsibilities for the day, the week, the month, the year, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do today to advance on those? Where are my Marines with XYZ? And then once I get through that, I go to Patriot Property Investment Group and figure out where we're at. And by gosh, we have made some major pivots in the last 2 years to really figure out what our niche was. And then from there, I'll go to the coffee club and figure out what things I need to do. And that's essentially the continuum of my focus. And I basically got it broken down to time blocking. So before the day starts, I've already got it time blocked out to where I'll have 1 or 2 things I can do in X time period. And then when I get to that time period, it's whichever one is most important is what I go for first. Again, 90% of the time, that's a Marine Corps task, whether it be checking in on one of my Marines or a product that I need to produce that's last minute, which, happens all the time. And that's what we're here for. So, in the spaces in between that, I have a management software that I use to organize all of our tasks with the investment group.
Wow.
Okay.
Listening to your story, Tucker, it's the changes that you're adapting to that fascinate me. And I'm going back. I'll have you go back for a second. So you're in Montana skiing on the slopes, having a blast, and then you fall into real estate and you start building that machine. But oh, by the way, you've got this other commitment that you've already put your name on the line for. So talk to me about the adjustment from growing this new passion that you have for real estate and then having to essentially shift or put it on hold or minimize the time in because all of a sudden the Marine Corps calls you back. What is that like?
So let me approach the first thing you mentioned, having a blast while I was skiing. I was having a blast, and don't get me wrong, those were great times. But I was also very aware that it was not something that I could do forever because I wasn't gonna ever leave where I was. Right? Like, I was essentially breaking even financially. So if I were to do it again, which I really wanted to do it again, I wouldn't have grown much. I mean, I would have probably been a better skier, but I wouldn't have any more financial capacity than I had when I started, which was next to none. I knew that I wouldn't be able to support a family at any point doing that. I knew that all it was going to be was fun. And so while I was having fun and really enjoying it, I was also, skiing, listening to audiobooks about investing. I read, I can't even tell you how many books while I was there in the interim time. So it wasn't like ski all day, party all night, wake up in the morning. Definitely went to some parties, but I was very deliberate about like, okay, these days I'm going to try and figure out like the type of man I want to be and the type of leader I want to be but I'm going to ski all day, right? I'm going to listen to books while I'm on the slopes because, I mean, there's nothing I'd rather do than do that. But when it comes to the Marine Corps, it started off, I was a flight contract, which, John, that means something to Michael. So as an officer, you're able to select law, ground, or air to be a pilot.
Okay.
I decided I wanted to be a pilot, and my application for that was accepted. So when I went to the first school, it was already determined that after that I would be sent to Naval Aviation School in Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
So the trajectory that I was taking, I was super focused. I want to be the best naval aviator that I could be. I'd already had my pilot's license, but I recognized from talking to folks that it wasn't a good idea to study for that school until you got to it, because I would have burned myself out, because it was 2 years from Montana to where I first stepped foot in the school. So I needed to have some time in there to do life before focusing in. But once you get there, it's game time, right? Like, none of the real estate accolades that I had, period, would be there if it wasn't for the leadership development that I built while training up to be a Marine Corps officer. I mean, hands down, had I not gone through all the arduous training, had all the character shifts that I needed to make to be a better Marine, I wouldn't have been worth much as an investor. All the character growth, the work ethic, I refined that through the Marine Corps, and I knew that before I'd even started it, and I knew that the Marine Corps had to be my focus if it was going to get anywhere, because number one, I'm a junior officer now. You only get one opportunity in your life to do that. And I say all the time that I want to put my best foot forward to do that, because I'll never forget it. On the other end, I wouldn't be worth much as an investor, as an entrepreneur, if I was sandbagging other responsibilities. It's a holistic thing. And so if you're deficient in one area, it'll reflect in another, whether you intended to or not. So you have to put your best foot forward in all the responsibilities, all the things that you do. It's the whole person, not just, are you good at sales? Are you good at marketing? Are you a good accountant? It's, how are you at your skill? How are you as a person? How are you as a family man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that make you better?
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned time blocking as a way to managing your days, but now having three pieces, the Marine Corps, the Terra Coffee Club, and your real estate ventures, like, how are you balancing among those three and thinking about, giving it 100% to each one of those things when, time's a finite resource, energy and effort, within that time has to be spent somewhere. Share some of your thoughts there.
So the first thing that I had to do was figure out what my primary responsibilities were. So as you change locations in the Marine Corps, your responsibilities change because your job changes or your role changes, whatever you want to call it. And so I always take that first. And then with my team, right? Because I couldn't be successful in business at all if I didn't have a team.
Yeah.
I make sure that we have all our bases covered. And if I need to, I'll pull out my equity from whatever business entity towards someone else, give them some more responsibilities, compensate them for it, for the success of the team. So
nice.
For the coffee club, for example, I brought in one of my really good friends from college to help us on the logistical end, because I didn't have the capacity to. I ended up giving him more equity than I have when I brought him in, because I needed him bad. And right now he's the most important player on the team. So it's really just about making sure that your team can fill where you can't, but also I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily the leader in either of those teams. I think it's a really a team effort. We're just starting out. I'm the youngest guy on both teams. So I'm, definitely the strategist as far as the direction that we take. But I wouldn't say that I make leadership decisions. I more so make and help drive team decisions.
That's awesome. Having the ability to reflect and look at things objectively and see where your gaps are, and then finding the right talent to fill those gaps, and then compensating, incentivizing people to do their best work in filling those gaps for you is a proven recipe for success. And it sounds like you're applying that in all the right ways, which is awesome to hear, Tucker.
I started the last couple of years with this goal of raising a ton of equity from investors to help the business out, which, that makes a lot of sense. Like, of course you'd do that. Well, what I realized was at the end of the day, I got to understand who I am when I'm speaking. And who I was somebody who had never operated a business before, trying to raise money to operate a business. Instead of being somebody who was already operating a lot of successful businesses with a proven track record to point back to when doing that. So both the coffee club, which is debt-free, there's
nice
associated
congrats,
the cash that we contributed ourselves, and the Patriot Property Investment Group only partners. So it doesn't take investor funds to go and purchase something. It invites people to come and partner with us on one deal at a time. So we niche down to the audience that we could work with and be the most successful with.
I like that.
And that was what started coming with success.
That's awesome.
Tucker, talk to me about Botero. And I'm going to use your coffee club as a reference to a larger idea. But what makes you want to enter into a space like coffee when people can say, oh, it's saturated, or there's so many big dogs out there, or everybody's doing it, or whatever? What was your passion to get into that? Because I think there are other people out here listening that are pursuing potential passions in spaces that may seem crowded, in spaces that may seem overtaken by much bigger players, where they think I'm never going to eke out anything of significance. So talk us through your starting that up and what's in your mind for the long run.
So that is a comment that I get all the time. And what's funny is, if you really think about it, other than water, in the entire world, coffee is the second easiest thing to get a hold of. And 80 to 90% of the people in the United States drink it every day, including myself. I'm not, and I never anticipated being a part of a coffee business, especially not to the scale that we're operating now. I sat down with one of my mentors, business partners now, good friend, Mauricio, when I was at the basic school in 2021, and I just wanted to learn about real estate. He was doing some single family home investing, and he knew more than me because I had no idea what I was doing. And he told me towards the end of our conversation, his dream was to run a coffee farm with his dad in Colombia.
Cool.
And I was like, dude, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Let's do that. And so after kind of going back and forth for 2, 3, 4 months about whether or not he actually wanted to work with me, I basically just sold him that I was going to do any and everything that I possibly could to make it happen.
Nice.
And the first thing that I did was tell him that his idea of raising $1 million of equity to go buy a coffee farm was not going to work. And not what we did. That was just never going to happen on any planet. trying to raise $1 million from people in the United States to purchase something in Colombia. Ain't no way. We drew up the documents to do it, he did, because he'd been working on it for a year before I even came into the fold. And biggest thing I always say is prove it before you ask for it. So we decided we were going to prove that we could operate a business internationally before we asked for any money from anyone. So we, after going back and forth on whether or not we had enough money ourselves to purchase a facility, we found a really great opportunity with the facility that we're operating out of now to lease it. Using economies of scale, it basically works out to $1,000 a month to lease our entire facility. Wow. And we got 4 months on the front end to do renovations to it, to basically, or we didn't have any rent that we had to pay on it. And that allowed us to have a facility with essentially money down, and then start day one importing coffee.
Bam.
So Tucker, I'm noticing a sort of a pattern or a trend that you tend to take yourself into the unknown world, like into things that you don't have a lot of experience in. So you put yourself in, I would guess, uncomfortable positions to learn, and then you learn through doing, which is, I think, a very important ingredient for anybody who's got entrepreneurial aspirations. So tell us, some key things to think about, in addition to what you've already shared, for anybody contemplating pursuing being an entrepreneur, starting something on their own, that you wish you had this advice given to you early days.
So in the context of the second act, which, is the direction you guys are taking this, I would say that you got to start from knowing something and being an expert in something. So, let's say you had a 20-year career, or you were doing XXX for however much time. Start from there so that you trust yourself as a competent individual.
Yeah.
And then once you believe in something and you're competent, it doesn't matter what anybody else says. Yep. Just do it. And accept failure, especially initially.
Yeah.
I still feel like in a lot of ways I don't have everything. I don't know everything. But that's not the expectation. The expectation is that you put your best foot forward consistently, always, and eventually good things will happen. Elon Musk puts it to say, your ability to succeed is based on your ability to take on an amount of stress that would break the average person, and then continually progress to operate under more and more stress to the point where it doesn't stress you out anymore. It just becomes your normal operating tempo.
Yeah. And I love that you said be willing to accept failure as one of the outcomes. There's countless times in anything I've sort of ventured into where you sort of get to a point, you started it, you got all the excitement going, and then reality starts to sink in whatever that is. And there's a moment, at least for me, where I'm like, you know what? It's possible that this is going to end with failure, and I just have to accept that. And once you get it, people who have sort of taken on risky ventures know the moment and know the feeling that I'm talking about, I think. And when you reach that point and you accept failure as a very real possibility, there's something kind of comforting in that. It's kind of a weird paradox. You've accepted that is an outcome, and then, at least for me, it provides additional motivation and strategic thinking and execution in what I'm doing, so I can optimize the probability to try to make it a success, but still knowing that there is a portion of the equation that could lead to failure. But I'm going to give it 100% in what I'm doing. And I think I've heard a lot of that from you today.
And how many people around us are inhibited by fear of failure and unable to take that next step because failure to them is the worst, but we realize, both with talking to Tucker here on the show, failure is such a part of just becoming the next thing, getting to the next step.
Yeah.
And we recognize that as just another step in the learning process. And how much better are we because we have failed a couple of times than we would be if we didn't ever fail and never experience that testing.
I mean, the difference between two people that start a business at 20, one succeeds and one doesn't, is that one of them quit. One of them just didn't keep going. Because even if it takes you 10, 20, 30 years, if you don't stop and continually put as much into it as you can, you will succeed. There's not another option. You might have to completely restart, change business models. You might lose money because, all the MRI machines that you bought, nobody wanted to buy. All those kinds of things have happened before.
Yeah.
You might realize that nobody trusts you with their equity, so you need to pivot to a different model, which is what we did. And you just do it. We took that at face value and said, okay, we spent all this money on this setup, but really in the grand scheme of things, not a lot. We'll take a haircut from that and pivot into a model where we can control more of the outcome, where it'll take us longer to make more, but we'll add more value and we'll meet people with where they expect us to be, instead of trying to explain to them very complicated concepts that we haven't proven that we can take on.
Are you trying to sell some MRI machines as well?
No, I took that as an example from and I don't even know if it's MRI machines, but is the Will Smith movie.
Oh yeah.
Where he bought all these machines and couldn't sell them because nobody wanted them, and then ended up he kept going,
broke the barrier.
That's the difference. And I would say to anybody who's thinking of pursuing a passion project or starting their own business, it's to put yourself into a space and surround yourself by people that make you feel heard. Not necessarily want to invest, not necessarily capable of being your COO or your chief of sales or whatever, but people that make you feel heard. And then after you get the support, and hopefully your friends are critical enough to say like, hey, that's actually like a really, like, you should just do this, like, not that. Because that kind of helpful feedback is great. And you just got to do it. You got to take the leap of faith, believe in yourself before you do anything else. Because if you believe in yourself, everybody will tell you you're wrong. But if you know you're not, you'll do it. I mean, a lot of people in more ways than one have told me that what I'm doing in some way is wrong, or I just need to approach that later in life, or you can't do it that way. And I'll take it, and I'll think about it, and I'll evaluate, like, okay, that could be a good point. Let's look at that. But if the commentary doesn't come with an element of assistance or advice, it's just unsolicited commentary, and you need to pay more mind to it.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you some of the feelings I've had so far as John and I have started this is there's folks out there that just, they don't understand, what we're trying or why we're trying things. And I think maybe that's part of just traveling the entrepreneurial road, is be willing to be misunderstood for a long time.
Be willing to be misunderstood. be willing to get knocked down a little bit, be willing for people to laugh at you a little bit, be willing to, I mean, I didn't tell anybody in my immediate circle about a lot of the stuff that I do in an unsolicited manner. Like, I'm not going to go to, say a volleyball game or whatever that I'm at and be like, oh yeah, like I do all these things, blah, 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 blah. Like, nobody cares, right?
Yeah.
So my friends came to visit, and we were at my church, and people were like, oh, like, you came out here for a week, you're just here to visit. And he was like, oh no, like me and Tucker are working on this coffee company, which is exactly what we were doing.
Yeah.
I hadn't told anybody, 'cause, I'm working on it, right? It wasn't really ready at that point. And so then all these people are all of a sudden informed, like, you're doing something different. So I had to have all these conversations, some of which were a little uncomfortable, to be like, you're doing this coffee kind of like what? And the thing is just, be positive. Like, yes, I'm doing it. We'll see how it goes. It's still kind of taking shape, but I'll absolutely let you know how it's going for sure. And all of that worked out. So what I learned from that was, one, nobody cares. So just keep it to yourself until they ask, and be polite when they do ask, because your friends, family, etc. will ask. And your mom will probably have some pretty colorful things to say about it, and you be positive. And my mom has definitely had a lot of colorful things to say, but it all comes from a place of love and support. And I do appreciate it, because when she is critical, it does force me to evaluate, like, okay, is this right or is this wrong? And then proceed from there. So you got to be able to take all the noise, all the commentary, and put it in front of you and sift through, like, what should be ignored, what should be taken under advisement, and what you should literally just bulldoze.
I think there's some enjoyment in catching people off guard when you choose the path that's not necessarily the clear defined path, or the path that a lot of people are used to, and having those naysayers speak up and say, well, it's not what I would do, but that's interesting that you chose that. I think there's some definitely enjoyment in there to eventually one day come back and either say, hey, you know what, you're right, it didn't work out, but I learned a ton, or, in the chance that it was a win, and a jackpot, to come back and say to yourself, at least, man, I'm so glad I took that path and took that, the challenge to break out of the norm. And I think that's what you're doing, Tucker.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you kind of opening it up to us here on the show, and just being able to be vulnerable and talk about some of the things you've learned and some of the things you've taken away in your pursuit that's a little less planned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tucker, we usually like to wrap up the Q&A with final thoughts or advice, but you've provided so much of that through the course of this conversation. But if there is something you wanted to end on, now would be the time to share it with the audience.
Yeah, I guess I'd end the call with a challenge, just to say, if you do have a passion project, or you have a business strategy that you think is good, I challenge you to, in some way, make it concrete. Like, put pen to paper, write the book you were talking about, and get somebody in your immediate circle and tell them about it, so that they hold you accountable for, every time you see that person, they're going to ask you about that thing that you brought up. So now you got to do something about it.
I love it.
Because that's one of the things that got me about it, was I had friends and family constantly asking me, like, how things were going. And when they weren't going great, it really forced me to be like, okay, no, we need to fix that. We need to change this. Because once you start the road, you have to turn around. That's quitting. So that's all I'll leave everyone with, a challenge.
I love it.
It's good. All right, Tucker, man, it's been a pleasure talking with you. You're definitely an inspiration for those who have encountered setbacks, and your story, I think, is helping people to understand how to turn negatives into a positive and just create something from maybe nothing, or a path that's not clearly defined. And we're excited to see your business grow. And, Michael and I, we both love real estate and we both love coffee. So hopefully we'll get to visit you up in Red Cedar Ranch in Flathead Lake, Montana one day. I hear Flathead Lake is pretty cool.
It's biggest lake west of the Mississippi in the U.S. So biggest non-Great Lake.
Awesome.
Isn't it also known for being like the clearest water in like the country? I swear there's some like top 10 list of the clearest most beautiful.
The water's cold, but it's crystal clear.
Yeah.
It's comes from Glacier National Park, so it all pours into the lake from Glacier. The rocks are all rainbow colored. So if you look at pictures of the rocks, they're all different colors.
That's cool.
And there's 2 really awesome ski resorts that butt right up to it. So it's just paradise.
Well,
Nice.
if people want to find you, what is the best way to do that?
So I'll attach my LinkedIn. If people are more comfortable on Instagram or Facebook, you can do that. All the accounts, like social media wise, are connected. So if you want to look at me or you want to look at Coffee Club, Patriot Property Investment Group, et cetera, it's all there. And I always try to answer folks' questions when they reach out on Facebook or LinkedIn within 24 hours, unless I'm somewhere overseas or on some kind of trip. But I appreciate the amount of people that actually do reach out, because I always think like, why are you coming to me with this? I'm happy to sit down and answer your questions. I had lunch with a kid the other day who he literally just wanted to learn from me. And I was like,
Nice.
just so humbled that you would pick me to go and get advice. So, that's the best way to do it.
Well, I'm sure you're a wealth
Very
of
cool.
information, man. And I'm glad that you are bringing people under your wing, just like I'm sure you've had people do the same for you. So keep that going on, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Tucker, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot of things going on, but you've certainly given our audience something to think about with your life story that in some ways is just getting started. And we'll be sure to include the links to your information in the episode details. And we look forward to reconnecting with our community next week.
Awesome episode, Tucker. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
This is great, guys. Thank you.
All right.
See you.
Thanks.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballinger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act with Michael and John on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.